welcome to the closing program for the exhibition Kasauli Art Centre 1976 to 1991, which has been curated and produced by the Sher-Gil Arts Foundation. And this iteration, that's been up since I think September, has been held in collaboration with Arthshila Santiniketan. I'd like to take this occasion to thank Arthshila, Mr. Siva Kumar and Gupta for inviting the exhibition, the centre coordinators, Manojta and Krishnata, for all their help over the last 2 months, including the installation. This evening, I'd really like to thank our speakers today for so readily and generously agreeing to speak today. Just a word about the format of the evening. We're first going to have a talk by Professor Siva Kumar, followed by a talk by and the occasion for the sort of program, and the way the program has been designed, is actually around this publication, which was also really the reason for this exhibition coming into being in many ways. We're going to leave the details of how you can order a copy of the book. There are copies of this in the Arthshila library as well for you to refer to. The Kasauli Art Centre publication is actually the 5th in a series that is being made by SSAF Tulikat Books, which is a co-publishing initiative between the Sher-Gil Arts Foundation and Tulikat Books, which has been publishing independently for over 25 years. And we publish a range of books on artists, the arts, and cultural studies, including art historical, critical, and theoretical writing. And the previous titles, for instance, include John Khatak Tarkovsky, Citizens, Filmmakers, Hackers, by Ashish Rajataksh, Portal, The Curious Case of Achanta Bose by Shan Bhattacharya, a compendium of collected, edited writings of K.B. Goyal, titled Critical Writings on Art from 1957 to 1998, and Vasata Thozo, Diaries, Projects, Pedagogies, 1998 to 2018, which is actually the first of the art document series that is edited by Geeta Kapoor. Where Professor Siva Kumar actually needs no introduction here in Santiniketan. But as I was saying to him, I think it's important also to recall a very, very long history of writing and making exhibitions. So I would like to take this occasion to also formally introduce Professor Siva Kumar. Born in Kerala, he is a renowned contemporary Indian art historian, art critic and curator, celebrated for his research on early Indian modernism, particularly the Santiniketan school. Educated in Kerala and Santiniketan, he began teaching at Vishwa Bharati in 1981 and was a professor of art history for over 4 decades and enriched the academic community with his passion and expertise before he retired just 2 years ago in 2022. He is the author of over 18 books. The earliest, 1995, The Santiniketan Murals, and Santiniketan, The Making of a Contextual Modernism in 1997. He also wrote Rabindra Chitravali, a comprehensive 4-volume compilation of Rabindranath Tagore's paintings, Enchantment and Engagement with the Music of K.G. Subramanian in 2015, amongst a range of essays on Rabindranath Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore, Nandalal Bose, Vinod Bihari Mukherjee, Ram Kadesh, and K.G. Subramanian. Of a very long series of exhibitions, some of them include Santiniketan, The Making of Contextual Modernism in 1997, a major retrospective of K.G. Subramanian in 2003, the centenary retrospective of Vinod Bihari Mukherjee, co-curated with Ghulam Mohammad Sheikh in 2006, and The Last Harvest, paintings of Rabindranath Tagore, which traveled to 9 museums across the world and 4 museums in India between 2011 and 2013. And he has also curated a very, very major exhibition on K.G. Subramanian's work that's on at Arthshila Delhi right now and will be till 2019. His talk today is titled The Arts and Community Building in Early Santiniketan. Thank you, Dr. Sher-Gil, for the right chair.
Thank you very much for this wonderful elaborate platform introduction. Is going to talk about something that is very, very local, and I hope somehow it commence with this exhibition. In a way, when we think about Santiniketan, it is a place shaped by Rabindranath's work. And there are two aspects of his work that immediately comes to mind and everybody talks about. That is his educational work in Santiniketan and the rural reconstruction work. So these are the two things that we talk about. But I think there is a third and equally important aspect of his work underlying both these larger projects. Now that is an effort to build a new community through artistic creativity. So I shall focus on that aspect of his work today. And the unity of these three aspects of his work was underscored by Rabindranath himself in a lecture he delivered, talk he delivered in 1924. And there he said, we have endeavored to include this ideal of unity in all the activities in our institution, some educational, some that comprise different kinds of artistic expression, some in the shape of service to our neighbors by helping the reconstruction of the village life. But the seeds of this work were actually kind of sown in the last decade of the 19th century. And we can trace it through a series of letters he wrote in that decade or the second half of the decade. The main burden of those letters, which part of it is published as Glimpses of Bengal in English translation, but that's just a small edited selection. But the Bengali original is much, much larger, more than double the size of the English book. So the main burden of all those letters is the discovery of rural Bengal, especially its beauty and of course its life. Now, the discovery of the beauty of Bengal and the world itself was almost instantaneous. In what is perhaps one of the first letters that he wrote from Shilaita, that is one of the escapes that the Tagores had, and which is dated 29 November 1889, he wrote, when one is living in Calcutta, one forgets how astonishingly beautiful this world is. It is only when you live here that you comprehend that this sun that sets every day among the peaceful trees by the side of this little river and the 100,000 stars that silently rise every night above this endless, ashen, lonely, silent sandbar, what a surprisingly noble even this is. The sun, as it rises slowly in the east at dawn, opens a page in some tremendous book, and the evening gradually turns another enormous page in the sky from the west. What an amazing script that too is. What sort of a silent, large, silent, deserted school is this? So these letters were all written to his niece, from the different villages around that area. So this inaugural report has the power of an epiphany. In other letters that followed during the next 4 years, we also get to know about what he called India's problems, and which he learned by staying and looking at life in these villages. Getting to know about the peasants and their lives and their joys and sorrows made him empathetic towards them and critical towards the educated members of his own class, who had no interest in the welfare of these people. And in a letter that he wrote a few days after the first one, he wrote, sometimes I feel so unbearably angry with the people of our country. not because they aren't getting rid of the Englishmen here, but because they don't do a thing about anything. They don't even have that aim in mind. They are indifferent to anything that the Englishman doesn't pay attention to. They think they are going to become important people if they form the Congress and raise their folded hands in supplication to the government. My personal opinion is that until we can do something for ourselves, it is better for us to remain in exile and keep doing our work. The people of our country think just the opposite. Whatever work is done out of sight, whatever has to be done privately, they dismiss as unimportant. And that which is completely short-lived and impertinent, mere gesture and ornament, that is what they lean towards. Ours is the most wretched country. It is difficult here to keep one's strength of mind so one can work. There is no one to help you. You cannot find a single person within 10 or 20 miles with whom you can exchange a few words and feel alive. Nobody thinks, nobody feels, nobody works. Nobody has any experience of a great undertaking for a life worth living. You will not be able to find an instance of mature humanity anywhere. So he is also complaining about what is absent in this sense. He is convinced while he was there that the arts have a role to play in this work for the country that he envisages. And in another letter, he writes, I can see that literature has a huge contribution to make to the history of man. Unfortunately, even among the educated people of a country, the winds of thought do not blow freely. The connection between life and thought is really very little, and it is impossible to feel when you are in the company of our countrymen that literature is an important force for mankind. One feels eternally hungry to find one's own ideals reflected in other people. So you can see that in the beginning of the 1890s, he was thinking of several things, and in some sense this becomes the basis for his life's work. He consolidates all this into a firm plan of action during the Swadeshi years, that's about 1904-05. And these thoughts are then structured as answers to certain questions like what is India's problem? How can we solve it? In Rabindranath's view, the issues were primarily two: the divide between the city and the village, and what he called the race problem. He tried to address the former first. He felt that educated Indians were alienated from the very foundations of life in India. And in another letter from 1893, he writes, the soil in which we are born is the soil of our village, the mother earth in whose lap we receive our nourishment from day to day. Our educated elite, abstracted from the primal basis, from this primal basis, wander about in the high heaven of ideas like aimless clouds, far removed from this our hope. If this cloud does not dissolve into a shower of loving service, man's relation with Mother Earth will never become truly meaningful. If all our ethereal ideas float about in vaporous inanity, the seed time of the new age will have come in vain. So, and in the next, as I said, as he went ahead in 1904, he wrote an important essay which he called Swadeshi Samaj. And in that essay, he proposes that the community as opposed to the nation as the natural unit for undertaking this work. And of course, in the Swadeshi atmosphere, it has to be done by oneself, or what he called Atma Shakti. He fleshed it out further and presented it as a plan of action to the nationalists at the Bengal Provincial Congress held in Patna in 1908, where he said in that address to the gathering, we must free our industries, reshape our education, and make the community strong and fit for service. Self-government will become real only if the leaders of these units can make themselves reliant and capable of coping with needs for their component villages, because he was thinking in terms of organizing the villages. He in fact even talks about unionizing them in some way. So they must have their own schools, workshops, granaries, their own cooperative stores and banks, which they should be assisted to found and taught to maintain. Each community unit should have its common meeting place for work and play where its appointed headmen may hear and settle local disputes and differences. Unless we unite to build an embankment by our joint effort, the results of our labor will, like trickles of water, slide down the hill slopes to fill alien reservoirs. We shall then produce food for others and ourselves starve, and not even know why this is so. We must therefore first bring together those whom we wish to serve. Of course, many of these things that he speaks out in 1908 are the things that he also then, starts doing in Shantiniketan, or at least in Sriniketan, which is part of the other part of this project. So Rabindranath's argument that India's problem was primarily not political but social, and that reconstruction of its society should take precedence over perceived political freedom, did not appeal to the nationalists. Although he saw himself as a poet unfit for political or practical work by temperament, when he found that his compatriots were not responsive to his ideas, he decided to go alone and put into practice what he preached. His effort was two-pronged. On the one hand, he tried to alleviate the condition of the peasants in the villages around his estates. So all these things he started doing there around Shiraida. Establishing cooperatives, organizing groups in villages into societies, into run schools, dispensaries, and even he helped to find a rural bank, which gave out small credits at low interest, and in fact, a substantial amount of his Nobel Prize money also went into the bank. And so that was one of the things he started there much before he shifted to Shantiniketan, at least that part of the work. On the other hand, he endeavored to bring about a meeting between educated elite and the village at the school he had already started in Santiniketan in 1901. The school was thus part of his larger long-term vision for India and the direction in which he thought India should go. In a letter he wrote to one of his friends, Dinesh Chandra Sen, in 1905, placing Santiniketan in the context of the Swadeshi movement, he wrote that his school was an effort to take education in our hands, and my ideal is to make my entire educational effort as indigenous as possible. Modeled after the forest schools of ancient India, nature played an essential role in its program from the outset. His own experience of schooling also told him that conventional education, which imprisoned children within classrooms and the pages of books, kills the innate curiosity and love for nature that children have. Nature's help, he argued, and I quote, is indispensable when we are still growing up and still learning, and before we are drawn neck and crop into the whirlpool of affairs. Trees and rivers and blue skies and beautiful views are just as necessary as benches and blackboards, books and examinations. Further, by encouraging the children to interact with the surrounding villages, he hoped to make them sensitive to the lives and problems of the peasants and the villagers. Thus, by setting up the school far away from the city, in the lap of nature, surrounded by villages, Rabindranath hoped to create young men and women who would be naturally sympathetic to the welfare of the villagers. In addition to this, from the outset, there was a great variety of literary and artistic activity at the school. In a lecture he delivered in China in 1924 to teachers there, he said, I have always had in mind to create an atmosphere. This I felt was more important than teaching of the classroom. I invited renowned artists from the city to live at the school, leaving them free to produce their own work, which I allowed the boys and girls to watch if they so felt inclined. It was the same with my own work. All the time I was composing songs and poems and would often invite the teachers around to sing and read with them. This helped to create an atmosphere from which they could imbibe something impalpable but life-giving. So this was something that he did quite consciously, and he thought that having arts amongst them would create what he called an environment. The role of the arts at Santiniketan grew with time, especially as the school gave way to Vishabharati during the interwar years, when painting, music and crafts became a part of the institutional framework. Kalabhavan, which opened a little before Vishabharati, was formally inaugurated, expressed his desire to expand their role in community life. But why did Rabindranath wish to give the arts such importance in his education program? Why did he think creating an atmosphere through the arts is more important than classroom teaching? To understand why the arts became more important for Rabindranath during the interwar years, we have to turn to his engagement with the second of India's problems, which he marked out for special attention and called the race problem or race conflict. And he first wrote about it in 1909 in a letter in the and there he said, one need not dive deep, it seems to me, to discover the problem of India. It is so plainly evident on the surface. Our country is divided by numberless differences, physical, social, linguistic, religious. And this obvious fact must be taken into account in any course which is destined to lead us to our place among the nations who are building up the history of man. And he visited this problem again in 1916 in his more famous essays on nationalism. He argued that India's solution to the race conflict was partial and imperfect. And this is what he wrote in one of those essays. In her caste regulations, India recognized differences, but not the mutability which is the law of life. In trying to avoid collusions, she set up boundaries of immovable walls, thus giving her numerous races the negative benefit of peace and order, but not the positive opportunity of expansion and movement. She accepted nature where it produces diversity, but ignored it where it uses that diversity for its world game of infinite permutations and combinations. She treated life in all truth where it is manifold, but insulted it where it is ever moving. Therefore, life departed from her social system, and in its place, she is worshipping with all ceremony the magnificent cage of countless compartments that she has manufactured. Now, you can see that he argued that India's imperfect solution to the race problem impacted, as he goes on this, all aspects of Indian life. And overcoming these innate weakness was very important for him. Even he thought for those who are fighting for the political freedom of India, this needs to be looked into. So he continued, nationalism in India, he warned them, the nationalists, we must remember whatever weakness we cherish in our society will become the source of danger in politics. The same inertia which leads us to our idolatry of dead forms in social institutions will assert itself in our politics in creating the tyranny of injustice. So he thought that even though he was not for creating nation states as the main object of social life, but he thought that if you create those nation states and if you ignore this question of race problem or what we call caste today, then we will not be able to produce a just society, and we will be actually giving birth to the tyranny of injustice. Building a new samaj or community free of these social weaknesses, underpinned his experiments in education and rural reconstruction in Santiniketan. The two primary sources employed for building the new Samaj meant this is his term for community. He envisioned where nature and the arts. And for Rabindranath, the two were closely interconnected. Nature was for him the springhead of Indian civilization. He wrote that Indian civilization was born in the forest, and so we have a deep, civilizational relationship with nature. And art springs from our being in this world and from the need to give expression to our feelings, or as he would put it, art expresses man's personality. But that personality for him was not independent of the world. Personality was man's relationship to the world. It was shaped by that. He felt that the world we grasp with our senses or mind is a partial world. The world becomes completely our own, he wrote, when it comes within the range of our emotions. It grows with our growth, it changes with our changes. We are great or small according to the magnitude and littleness of this association, according to the quality of its sum total. If this world were taken away, our personality would lose all its content. So, when he talked about the world and what art should be doing, it is this personal world that we grasp that should be expressed and shared with others through art. The most important tool that Rabindranath had at his disposal for grasping the world with the full range of his emotions and sharing with others was his songs. The over 2,200 songs he wrote were divided into various categories by him. Three of the largest were Prakriti or nature, praying or love, puja or worship. Other smaller groups included patriotic and ceremonial songs, and those he wrote as part of his plays. However, the motive of connecting them, all the different categories, was actually nature. Now, for instance, you can take one of those songs. Most of the people here, at least majority of them, they will know the songs much better than I do. So they will recognize this. So in one of these songs, which is categorized as a song of devotion, the lyric runs like this in English translation. If you did not give me love, why paint the dawn sky with such songs? Why thread garlands of stars? Why make a field of flowers my bed? Why does the south wind whisper secrets in my ear? So this is a puja song. But you can see it's all about nature, and the God is somewhat abstract, but you only grasping through all the elements of nature. Now you can take his other categories, his political songs or patriotic songs, one of which is now the national anthem of Bangladesh, which says, "My Bengal of gold, I love you. Forever your skies, your air set my heart in tune, as if it were a flute. In spring, the fragrance of a mango groves makes me wild with joy. In autumn, in the full blossom paddy fields, I've seen spread all over sweet smiles. And what beauty, what shades, what an affection, and what tenderness, what a quilt have you spread at the feet of the banyan trees and along the banks of rivers." Now we can see that, even if you turn to our national anthem, it may not be directly nature, but it's geography. There is nothing of the political in that sense in it. And if you, anybody living here will know what the campus song of Santiniketan, where it clearly says that we are all united in brotherhood by the skies of this place, by the dawns and the dusk and its beauty, and the shal forest and the amloki trees and nodding in the wind all the time. These are things, and they connect us and into a brotherhood. That is what the Santiniketan song really says. Now, this was very important, and he actually did this removal of these barriers and put nature at the center, even in his poetry in some sense. And he wrote about it, I have not divided my devotion, keeping my soul, the world of nature, and the Lord of the world, as it were in separate compartments. Whether through the soul or through the world, I find no end to amazement. So this was also a conscious effort, and many of the songs were actually written, and there are songs written for different ages, starting from kindergarten children. And a lot of them is about nature, making you look at nature, notice things in nature. So anybody who lives here and listens and participates in this festivals and so on will know this. So the sense of wonder and oneness with nature runs through many of his songs, cutting across categories. Many of them, especially about seasons, make the everyday world come alive with magical vividness. His songs awakened the senses, refined the emotions, and quickened the sensibilities of the students, the teachers, and the Santiniketan community at large. They taught them to experience and love their natural surroundings, empathize with each other through the shared experience. Anyone who knows this campus song, as I said, would have experienced this. In creating this empathy, he was joined by the artist of Santiniketan. Just as Rabindranath made the everyday world sensuous and real by connecting them with the inner world and animating them with tangible rhythms of the Bengali language, Nandalal Bose and his associates made the everyday world of Santiniketan come alive in their words. They did so not by choosing to paint corners of it that might be considered beautiful according to some canon of art, but by embracing it in its entirety and transforming it into their object of love. They painted long scrolls that showed the landscapes stretched out from horizon to horizon, spread it out like an encyclopedic canopy of rural life across the ceiling of a hostel. They showed her in a summer barrenness, bursting into green succulents during the rains, and decked in flaming red and yellow flowers in the spring. They taught their viewers to look at trees and plants, love the gnarled hardness of their trunks and the tenderness of the flowers. Notice their shapes and patterns, respond to the small and the big in nature with equal curiosity. Feel the rhythm of plants and animals and of their own bodies, and experience space not as a mere receptacle of objects, but as yet another means for the articulation of emotional response. What Rabindranath did with words, they did with forms and colors. Like Rabindranath, they too made the world seep in through the senses, touch the minds and the hearts of the community. Rabindranath did through his songs then was extended through the seasonal festivals he planned and brought into existence. They connected the community with the earth and its tillers, the world of trees and agriculture, and the seasons. These festivals occasioned many of the songs he composed. Here too he was joined by the artist as collaborators. Besides giving birth to a modernism based on the sense of an experienced and shared world, they also breathe life into the real world and transform the familiar surroundings. On special occasions, they transform even nondescript parts of the campus into embodiments of beauty and distinction with simple hand-painted alpanas. They created distinctive ornaments for the pageants and festivals using leaves and flowers, and they employed simple skills so that the community too could participate in these creative activities. Even the alpana decorations they devised were usually based on the natural world and thus helped to connect the community with the environment. By placing nature at the center of the creative work, Rabindranath and his associates helped the members of the Santiniketan community to transcend the traditional identities of caste, religion, and language, which divided them into different social groups, united them anew as a community. It was important for those who wish to create a new Samaj. This I think is very important, that what constitutes your identity. So he is trying to rub out all the other things that constitute your identity and bring nature as the common thing that constitutes your belonging to a place, loving that place is the element that constitutes your identity. So it was important for those who wish to create a new Samaj to free themselves from acquired habits and the ensuing tyranny of history and see the world afresh. Because as Rabindranath believed, only when we experience and create as free individuals, we gain the opportunity to expand our sympathies and create a new world. However, creating a sense of oneness with nature was only the first step in creating the new Samaj. He wrote, "It is easy to feel this communion with one's own nature with nature." Rabindranath said again, continuing the same essay, "In this communion we do not find complete satisfaction because we have a soul and that seeks greater communion. It is possible to have this wider union not with nature but only with humanity." So nature is the first thing, but from there we had to progress to creating that empathy and union with other people. In what is perhaps his final assessment of his work at Santiniketan, it's written in 1940 or 41. On the one hand, in this place, I have called upon the joyous communion of nature, and on the other, I have wished to make a bond between man and man, a bond of hearts. Now, an attitude to nature implies an attitude to society and humanity, but it does not make it explicit. In his novels and plays, Rabindranath addressed the questions of broader social and political importance more directly. In them, he is not primarily engaged in awakening the finer and universal aspect of humanity, but in awakening new social values through a contesting dialogue with both traditionalists and the nationalists. His plays played a more significant role than his novels in taking the message to the Santiniketan community. Several of them were not only written in response to prevalent social issues, but also performed by the students and teachers in Santiniketan. The first play that was performed in Santiniketan by the students and teachers was Sher-Gil in 1908. Following this, 15 of his later plays were first performed in Santiniketan. Later it went on to Calcutta, but this was the place where it was first performed. Apart from this, every year there were one or more repeat performances of his plays in Santiniketan. This is how W. Pearson, who collaborated with him in the early years and who taught here for a while, he describes these plays and the rehearsals of these plays. At the end of each term, I quote from Pearson, at the end of each term, arrangements are made for staging one of the poet's plays. The poet coaches the actors himself, first reading the play aloud and then reading it over with those who are to take part. During the days when the play is being rehearsed, there are not many classes held, for the boys and the whole school are always present at the rehearsals. In this way, the ideas of the poet are assimilated by the boys without their having to make any conscious effort. So you can see yesterday we were talking about this kind of collaboration, how plays actually help us to do that. And here, right from the beginning, the first day till the final performance, you have the audience itself, seeing it. The rehearsal itself was open to them. This was there for a long time. When I came here as a student in 74, even those days, the rehearsals would be held in an open space, and anyone who was interested could see them. So sometimes we saw over a month a whole rehearsal, and you saw all the rehearsals and you saw the performance as well. So this was the standard practice here. Now, thus, with his songs, if he sang a Samaj into existence and shaped the sensibilities of its members, with the plays he presented the problems of the world to them from a perspective different from that of the nationalist and the traditionalist. Here again, the artist worked alongside Rabindranath by devising simple yet effective stage settings for his plays Besides this, they added to this discourse with their murals and sculptures, which all of them which were done in the community spaces, which was then became markers of certain social value. These included Nandal's murals documenting the landscapes and the festivals of Santiniketan, his narrative representation of Rabindranath's playing Adi Puja, underscoring the readiness of an individual, in this case an artist, to place her art and life at the service of truth. Vinod Bihari's meditation on the history and destiny of India in the Hindi-born mural, which emphasized on the contribution of the heterodox and humanistic traditions of the Bhakti poets of India's civilizational stream, and Ramkingal's monumental outdoor sculpture valorizing the subaltern Sangal tribal peasants and their later transformation into proletarian mill workers. All these works taken together map a community with values that are very different from those of the traditional Indian society and one closer to Rabindranath's idea of the Samaj. The story, however, would not be complete without mentioning transformation of rural development at Srinagar, brought about by the role of crafts in it. The Institute of Rural Reconstruction was founded in 1921. Its objective, in the words of Rabindranath, was to bring back life in its completeness to the villages, making them self-reliant and self-respectful, acquainted with the cultural traditions of the country, and competent to make efficient use of modern resources for the improvement of the physical, intellectual, and economic conditions. So, in a sense, all that he tried out much earlier in his estates, he is doing it on a much more, larger scale here in South. And when I'm not going to talk about the project and then, but point to you one of the things that happened, which was a result of this. When the training program in the craft started in the villages, the enrollment was strictly on caste basis. Nobody wanted to move out and study in it. Only traditional cobblers did tanning and leather crafts. They tried to introduce tanning and leather crafts in a big way. Now you can see it is all over the place. But at that first instance, only the traditional cobblers, the muchis, were willing to come in and nobody else. Only the weavers came for weaving and nobody else wanted to be there. The carpenters did woodwork and nobody else wanted to study carpentry. But 25 years later, in the listing of what the situation was in 1947, we see that of the 259 people who did leather work, only 36 were traditional cobblers. And you can imagine in India, leather was the most untouchable thing. Of the 58 people who were doing, 154 weavers, only 58 were from the weavers caste. Of the 28 who were employed in carpentry, only 7 were from the carpentry class. And of the 34 potters, only 2 were traditional potters. So you can see that in that 25 years, there was a lot of social transformation that happened through the practice of crafts in those villages. There are other things that happened, the education levels went up, the economic level went up and all that. But this itself, you can see, was a very remarkable social transformation. But was this experiment entirely successful? Rabindranath himself has written even in 1917 that there will be difficulties. Perhaps not. But it was one of the first efforts at building a secular and inclusive modern community in India. And it is an effort worth remembering. Thank you.